Hello there, and welcome to the Lowdown here on GhanaWeb TV. My name is Eche Atisu, and today our conversation is going to focus on an area of news and a big media organization, one that all of us are aware of, the BBC, and what they've been doing in Africa, expanding its reach to news lovers and the audiences they have in Africa. Today, my guest is someone who is starting one of the newest babies, as I could call it, of the BBC in some parts of Africa. Nkechi Ogbonna is BBC's correspondent in West Africa, and I'm having a conversation with her, albeit virtually. She is in Nairobi now, and she's going to tell us a few things about what the BBC is doing, why we should be interested in all of that. Once again, welcome to the Lowdown here on GhanaWeb TV. Hi, Nkechi.
Hello, Eche. How are you doing?
I am very, very well, and it's good to connect with you. How is Nairobi? How are things going out there?
Nairobi is beautiful. The weather is amazing. It's lovely. It's fresh air. It's a higher altitude. It's not humid. It's calmer than my city where I'm coming from, Lagos.
Oh, yeah.
And so, yes, Nairobi is amazing. It's a beautiful place.
That's good to hear. I mean, so what's taking you all the way from Lagos to Nairobi? What's happening there that you've had to leave home, as it is, to go all the way to Nairobi? What's happening?
And so the BBC is moving flagship Africa program, which everyone on the continent and even those in the diaspora love so much. It's focused on Africa. The podcast is moving to Nairobi, which has fast become the BBC's regional hub on the continent. Obviously, we have BBC bureaus in Lagos, Nigeria, in Accra, Ghana, in Dakar, Senegal, in Nairobi, in Johannesburg, in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. But Nairobi has become our regional hub, and the program is moving to the continent for the past over 6 decades. Focus on Africa has been broadcast from London, the BBC's headquarters. But now we want to bring the program closer to the people, closer to our audiences, closer to the communities that we tell their stories. And that's why I am here to be the lead presenter for the Focus on Africa podcast.
When you say the Focus on Africa podcast, and for us back at Ghana, we relate more with the Focus on Africa program, especially because of the late Komla Dumo and how we've all grown to love the program and all of that. What's different now with the podcasting? You mentioned you're moving it to Nairobi because you want to get closer. What's so different now, or what's going to be different from all that we've been experiencing with the podcasts from London now coming to Nairobi?
Well, it's the same podcast. It's just in a different location. But what audiences are going to be expecting that is a little bit different from what they're used to is the fact that we still have the Monday to Friday audio podcast, which is broadcast from any platform where audiences get their podcast from, wherever they listen to their podcast from. But the new addition we're having to the Focus on Africa podcast is a visual aspect of it. We are adding a visual podcast to our weekly program. The visual podcast would be on Saturdays on the BBC News Africa YouTube channel. So what that means is about 30 minutes of engaging, in-depth conversation. Just one main story or one main feature where we have physical and virtual guests come on the program to talk about things that concern our audiences. It could be from health to politics to climate change to the economy, whatever it is, we would have such conversations, longer, in depth. It's like a deep dive into the news behind the headlines on on the Saturday visual podcast edition. That's one. Secondly, what's new again is because obviously journalism is changing. The way audiences consume content is also changing. And so we're also adding a new digital element to the podcast whereby we're exploring our social media handles. The BBC News Africa social media handles would have content from the podcast being digitized. So very short clips of say 60 to 90 seconds will be shared on social media across X, across Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, these social media platforms where most of our young people consume content from. Focus on Africa podcast would also meet them on these platforms, and they can consume the content in a shorter, quicker, shareable formats across these platforms. And so these are some of the new additions we're adding to the podcast that is coming home, as we're saying.
Africa's population is largely young. I mean, we have the youth and all that. Is that informing a lot of the things you're doing? You mentioned at the tail end, social media and short clips and all that. How is the BBC's Focus on Africa podcast connecting to the young population of Africa to also help expand its reach?
First of all, we are telling stories that interest our young audiences. Now, we must understand that for the longest, audiences, especially our young people, our women, have been underserved when it comes to media content. Secondly, most of their stories have gone unreported or even underreported. When they are reported, they are underreported. And so we are ensuring that the kinds of stories we're telling are appealing to our young people. We are meeting them at the point where they consume the kind of content that they want to consume. These days, it's very difficult to retain audience attention. So many competing factors. Everyone is a blogger. Everyone is a vlogger. Everyone is a journalist now. Once you have a smartphone, you have ability to tell a story. And so we are ensuring that we're meeting our audiences right where they are at their own pace, at their own time, in the comfort of their devices. And so it's part of some of the decisions that, it's part of the reasons that have informed the decisions that management has decided to bring the program closer to the people, and also change the format in which we're telling the story. So previously, it used to be maybe 3 news stories in a straight bulletin of Focus on Africa. But now we're concentrating on 2 stories. So it's like a story 1 and then like a feature story. This is for the audio format, and then for the visual podcast, we're doing like 1 main feature story with a prolonged conversation. And so these are just ways in which we're ensuring that we're carrying our audiences along. 1, 2, the audiences are the center of what we do. Every form of our creativity, every form of our storytelling has the audiences at the center of it all. And that's the idea behind Focus on Africa.
But I want us to, I'm speaking with you now and I'm wondering why Nkechi, and many of our viewers will also be wondering why you, what's it about you? Who is Nkechi Ogbonna? I mean, we've seen you on TV, we've seen you around reports and things like that. Now that you're going to be the main voice, as it were, for this podcast, I mean, won't tell us about who exactly you are. I mean, if I met you in town, what else should I know apart from knowing that you're on the screen telling us or bringing us news? How do I relate with you, your background?
So first off, Nkechi is a journalist who has been a journalist for over 10 years.
Okay.
Currently, I have been at the BBC for over 8 years now. And so I started my journalism career right even in school. Professionally, I've been doing this for 10 years, but before I became a professional, I had been a journalist even while in my undergrad days. So I studied journalism at the University of Jos, where Komla Dumor attended as well, I must emphasize. And so I studied journalism, mass communication at the University of Jos in North Central Nigeria. And while in school, we had a campus radio station where it was just brand new and they were looking for volunteers, people who had a flair for journalism, people who were not just interested in just people who were just studying journalism, but probably also just wanted to practicalize what they were studying. And so I was very quick to put my hands up to say, hey, it's an experience. Nothing is wasted. And so I spent 3 years at the campus radio station called ICE FM, so ICE 96.1 FM in the University of Jos. And that's where I made all the mistakes.
All right, so I'm still speaking with Nkechi Ogbonna of the BBC. The BBC is bringing this Focus on Africa podcast to Africa in Nairobi. When we return, we'll get more into the conversation and learn more about Nkechi and her work as a woman in journalism. Don't go anywhere. We're back here. We're still with Nkechi Ogbonna. She is the face of BBC Focus on Africa's podcast. Let's move to Nairobi in Kenya. Nkechi, we're having a conversation earlier about your journey, how you are at the University of Jos, and what you were doing at the radio station that you said ICE Radio. Is it ICE FM?
ICE 96.1 FM. Okay. Yes, please. And so I was a reporter and a producer and a presenter as well. So that was where I made all the mistakes in my formative years in broadcasting. It was my first exposure to broadcasting, and I spent 3 years at this radio station learning all I learned in the classroom, practicalizing it, and then I launched out into the wider broadcast industry. I went to become a business reporter and producer at CNBC Africa.
Okay.
And you'd ask yourself, business news, from journalism school to business news, what's the relationship? Well, I was looking for an opportunity. I just wanted to learn. I just wanted to grow. And that was the only opportunity that was made available to me. And so I grabbed it. It was unfamiliar territory given, but I took up the challenge to say, it's business news. I have to now learn how to make young people who ordinarily are not interested in business news become interested in business news. And so I found a way to tell stories about people's personal income, into managing finances, into the economy, inflation. So those were some of the themes that appealed to young people, aside the stock market and the capital market, which most of them were uninterested in and felt it was practically boring. And so after that, then I went into a bit of branding and comms before I landed my first job as a data journalist at the BBC, and grew over the years. From a data journalist 8 years ago, I became a business journalist still at the BBC, became a senior journalist reporter covering West Africa, and then I became a West Africa correspondent. So hitting all the hard news, breaking news, all the military coups, the insecurity challenges, and all of that in the region. So covering all of that, and then now growing into becoming the lead presenter for Focus on Africa podcast. So it's been a journey of growth, a journey of a very humbling experience, I must emphasize. It's been a great journey in the last 8 years at the BBC.
What would you say, especially, you're a woman, and it's always nice to speak with women who are doing things right at the top, because for the longest we've had conversations around how women can also be at the table when it comes to decisions and things like. You're a woman in journalism. How has your work especially impacted or helped other young women all these years doing this job of journalism? How has it helped? And especially with the Focus on Africa podcast coming to Africa, how are you hoping that would also translate into inspiring more women or young people to get into maybe journalism one day or aspire for greater things themselves?
I was inspired by so many women. I cannot count how many broadcasters and news presenters in the 90s and in the early 2000s inspired this journey. It's been a long time coming. And I am grateful that those women were given the opportunity to do what they were doing because they inspired young people like me who looked up to them. And so I'm talking about our own local broadcasters in Nigerian Television Authority, NTA, Tokumbo Ajayi, the Ruth Benemesa of peers, the Eugenia Abus of our time in Nigeria, who were women who told stories and took control of storytelling when it came to reading the news and making or carrying audiences along, even when they are covering stories and covering events. And so that inspiration, reached me, and I took up that mantle, I took up the baton and continued. I have continued to help and inspire journalism students who want to do this. Thankfully, I discovered at a very early age what I wanted to do with my life and what my greater calling was. And so I have gone on that journey. I've tried not to derail from that path. And so I have tried to, help mentor young people who are either in journalism school or who have finished journalism school and are starting out their careers in journalism, be it local media, be it international media. And the media space is ever changing. The industry is constantly evolving. And so it's a thing of what we learned 5 years ago or 10 years ago is definitely not what's applicable in today's journalism world or media industry. And so it's a thing of constantly keeping up with the times, constantly unlearning what we have learned, relearning new things, adapting to the new ways of storytelling. Now we're combating misinformation, we're combating disinformation. So learning the new tools that will help our newsrooms and help us to be trustworthy sources when it comes to information dissemination. So it's just the thing. It's always inspiring to see young women taking up space, especially leadership space in newsrooms. Women becoming cameramen, women becoming floor managers, studio managers, women becoming producers, presenters, editors, managers, media managers, and so on. And so I think the time is now, and women have always been in these spaces, but they've just never blown their trumpet. They've always stayed humble. And so now we are not humble anymore. We are showing up and showing out in these spaces that we have always probably, been the underdogs in all of these roles and in all of this media institutions. So it's exciting to see that the times are changing and we are changing with the times as well.
All right. I just want to maybe get a take of what you think. I mean, we're in Africa, and Africa has been having journalism. We've been practicing this for a while now, following the greats like the BBC and the like. What do you make of our progress in journalism? What do you say? How well are we doing? And why is the work you do important in shaping up more of what we do in media? There are new things, like you also mentioned, misinformation, disinformation. We tackle that every day. How is that working around? How are we doing? Do you think that Africa is doing well?
I think Africa is on the right path when it comes to storytelling and the changing media landscape. Obviously, we've seen with the penetration of digital penetration in many parts of the continent, access to data, access to the internet. This has helped with information dissemination. So before, it was a thing of when you're telling about stories, it's mostly people in the urban area who get the news. But now people in the rural areas are actually also being carried along and also, getting access to the same information. So I think Africa is not doing badly. a lot more work needs to be done when it comes to data affordability, when it comes to internet penetration, when it comes to bandwidth and internet access in some of our remotest corners on the continent. So a lot more work when it comes to infrastructure needs to be done. However, when it comes to the newsrooms that are currently on the continent, I tell you, newsrooms are doing a lot. Digital expansion. We're seeing newsrooms adapt to digital radios adapt to digital forms of transmission. We're seeing even traditional radio and TV platforms now digitizing their content, ensuring that that content that is accessible to those who are seated in the comfort of their homes or watching their TV is also accessible to those who are on the move. People in the trains, people in the buses, people in the tricycles are able to consume information on the go, thanks to their mobile devices, their smartphones, their tablets, and what have you. And so a lot more work needs to be done when it comes to that, but we're also seeing the train moving. Secondly, the evolution of artificial intelligence. AI has come to stay, and every newsroom would get on board. Every information dissemination mechanism would have some form of artificial intelligence involved in their processes if they want to meet up with the current technology demands or current news needs of our audiences, whose appetite for content is very high, but attention span is very little. And so a lot of work needs to be done into how we use AI. But again, when it comes to the use of AI, we need to be very conscious about the governance around AI, the policies, the frameworks that protect the user of AI and the consumer of the AI content. It's very important that African governments also create regulatory frameworks to ensure that AI is helping and not being a nuisance, especially when it comes to people who are manipulating images, manipulating videos, who are creating non-existent content, and using it as a weapon to push misinformation, which is very harmful to our communities. So it's important that, yes, we embrace the technology of the day. However, we need to regulate how we use it to protect ourselves and to protect those who are consuming the content that we are disseminating.
Back to the BBC, just before we wrap up, I mean, what's new apart from the podcast? Is there anything else that the BBC is doing regarding the African region that we should all be interested in?
The BBC has always been a huge investor when it comes to the African continent. First of all, it's the only broadcaster in the world that broadcasts in 42 languages across the world service. First off. Secondly, the BBC broadcasts in 11 languages on the continent alone. No other media house does that. And so what we're looking at is to ensure that these audiences that we serve, around 120 million people consume the BBC content in one way or the other every week. 120 million people across the continent of 1 billion. So that's over 10% of people on the continent consume BBC in one form or the other. So I think for the BBC, it's a continuous process of looking for innovative ways to reach more audiences. We're looking at more in-depth storytelling. We're looking at explainers, digital explainers, how we can simplify very complex themes or complex news stories for audiences into smaller bites, into bite sizes, so they can understand it. We are done with the era of speaking jargons. We're done with the era of bringing alien themes or alien concepts, to audiences, and people are just not following. But right now, we are bringing diverse content to what we're putting out to audiences and putting the audiences at the center of all that we are doing. So these are just some of the ways that the organization is still planting its footprint on the continent. We have the Igbo service, the Hausa service, the Great Lakes, the Tigrinya, Gahuza, the Swahili. These are all language services the BBC broadcasting, and we would continue that expansion on this continent because we believe that we need to meet our audiences where they are, and that's the driving factor for the Focus on Africa expansion and bringing it home, as say, to the continent.
So, Nkechi, the next time I hear your voice, where would it be? For everyone else who will be hearing your voice or seeing you, where would we find you?
You'll find me in two main places. First off, on the BBC News Africa YouTube channel. So if you go to YouTube and just search BBC News Africa and click subscribe, you would get notified, and click on turn on your notifications. You will get notified every week when the new episode of the visual podcast drops. Then secondly, you will find me across BBC News Africa social media handles. So on Facebook, on X, on Instagram, you would see me there. And you would also hear me on all the podcast platforms. Wherever you get your podcast from, you would get the Focus on Africa podcast, audio podcast, 5 times a week on all these platforms. And on my personal social media handle as well, which is Nkechi Ogbonna. So if you search Nkechi Ogbonna on Instagram, on Facebook, on X, find me there, or my handle at I am Nkechi Nna. You would find me in all of these platforms.
Well, thank you very much, Nkechi. Thank you for making time to speak with us. That's Nkechi Ogbonna. She's actually the face of BBC's Focus on Africa podcast. Nkechi, make sure you next time you pass by Ghana, you're making time to visit us at GhanaWeb. And we wish you all the best. All the best.
Definitely.
We wish you all the best with your work there.
Thank
in
you
Nairobi.
so much.
All right, so once again, that's been my guest, Nkechi Ogbonna. She is host of the BBC's Focus on Africa podcast. We've had a lively conversation on what the BBC is doing and how they're bringing the Focus on Africa podcast to Nairobi here in Africa, closer to you and I. Thank you for joining us on this episode of The Lowdown here on GhanaWeb TV. My name is Eche Atisu. Look for us on YouTube, GhanaWeb TV. Subscribe, click on the notification button. And as always, until another time, be kind to one another. Bye-bye.